This episode is brought to you by Experian. Are you paying for subscriptions you don't use, but can't find the time or energy to cancel them? Experian could cancel unwanted subscriptions for you, saving you an average of $270 per year and plenty of time. Download the Experian app. Results will vary. Not all subscriptions are eligible. Savings are not guaranteed. Paid membership with connected payment account required.
Slashes, huh? What's your favorite scary movie?
Not that one.
And welcome back to Horror Queers. We're talking armless ventriloquist performances. We're talking elephant funeral processions. And we're talking lucha libre saints. And I'm Joe.
And I'm Trace, and we're talking I Order My Hands to Kill Her!
Oh, I love it.
I love Concha so much.
Okay, so this was a first-time watch for both of us, but I'm going to put my cards on the table. I kind of love this.
I really liked it. I actually watched it again just before this recording, because I felt like, sorry everyone, I mean, you've seen the title of the episode, but we are discussing Alejandro Jodorowsky's Santa Sangre. And yes, this was a first-time watch for me. It was... Joe, have you seen a Jodorowsky movie before?
Yes, I have seen The Holy Mountain.
Okay, this was my first Jodorowsky, and all I knew about him was that he does very surrealist type films, and that he tried to make Dune once.
Yes, correct on both accounts. This is apparently also his most accessible film, so this is actually a good gateway entry for us.
Yes, and so I was expecting something much more abstract with this movie, and I was surprised that, the narrative was mostly straight. It gets a little gonzo in, I would say, the last act, but even still, it's not difficult to follow.
No, I think there's going to be things we can unpack in greater detail. There's a lot of symbolism. As you mentioned, there is some surrealism, but on a narrative level, it's very much, we're doing like a little dash of Psycho. And that's what we got.
It's so funny because you before you had seen it, you kind of like prime me for it. It's like, oh yeah, it's like Jodorowsky's Psycho. And so I was watching the first half of this movie, and I was like, okay, I mean, like,
where is it?
I guess, but like, where's the psychoness? And everyone, like, in this 2-hour movie, like, it doesn't really. I mean, again, like. It is a genre film. Like, there are horror elements to it, but I found this movie more touching than I found it like horrifying. You know.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't the kind of film where you're going to walk out of it and say, ooh, that was scary.
Oh, no.
But I do think a bunch of people might walk out of it and say, oh, that was disturbing.
It's an assault on the senses. It's also fucking gorgeous. Like,
it's so gorgeous.
I was just like, I miss color in film.
Right? Yeah.
But yeah, so as I said, this is my first Jodorowsky. So do you like The Holy Mountain? Is that something that you like really latched onto after a first time viewing?
It was one of those ones that I had built up a lot in my mind, and I thought, oh, well, this is one of his most famous ones, apart from El Topo, which was infamously a favorite film of John Lennon and has basically been bought up by his estate, and now you can't find it anywhere. So those were the two famous ones by Jodorowsky. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to start with his masterpiece. I'm going to watch The Holy Mountain, and it is confounding. It is a very challenging film. Deeply gorgeous in the same way as this, hugely vibrant, full of color, very deep on symbolism to the point where I was just like, I don't know what's happening. Like, it's one of those ones where you might as well have the computer open next to you so that you can be reading and figuring out what you're watching as you go.
That's a film too where it's like both with that and I'm assuming El Topo, where it's a thing where I'm like, I would rather see it for the first time in a movie theater. And I know that like the Alamo Drafthouse has screened The Holy Mountain like before. So I just feel like, that's how I would want to see it. Or as you said, with my computer next to me open so I can be looking up all the symbols. But again, like, that's going to distract me while I watch it. And
100%. Yeah.
That's why I watched Santa Sangre a second time too, because, whenever I watch a movie for this podcast, I always take notes, as you do. And I wanted to watch it without taking notes, just to be like, okay, I've taken my notes. I just want to now like sit and absorb the movie. And I didn't necessarily like catch anything more, but it was good to have that experience, I think, just to be like, okay, let me just like watch this movie and like level with it for a bit.
Not to get hyperbolic or anything, but it does feel a bit like it's an immersive film, like something that you can really lose yourself in, if only because it is so gorgeous. And there's always really fascinating things to look at. Like there's a lot of details here that maybe they mean something, maybe they don't, but they're always very captivating.
Yes. But okay, so because I am not familiar with Jodorowsky at all, I wanted to do like a little bit of a deep dive. Well, not a deep dive, I guess, but like, I wanted to learn more about him because again, like he is like kind of this prolific filmmaker. I would maybe argue an auteur.
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's one of those things where I was like, shit, like I feel like a bad film student because I'm not familiar with this.
Well, we're pretty candid on the show as having admitted that we're not super familiar with a lot of Mexican cinema. You know, the fact that this guy, I guess, follows in the footsteps of Luis Buñuel, who is, you know, also Spanish. But I think this is just one of those, like, it's either a film school watch or it's because you are a connoisseur and somebody said, hey, you need to get this guy into your eyeballs.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, let's do a brief primer on Jodorowsky. So,
okay.
Everyone, yes, Alejandro Jodorowsky is a Chilean-born French surrealist filmmaker, which, wow. But he kind of got his start. He started an experimental theater troupe in the late 40s before moving to Paris in the 50s to work with the French mime Marcel Marceau. By the way, so you and I both watched the Seven Films release of Santa Sangre, and I poured through most of the extra features, of which there are
a lot.
8+ hours of. Yeah, including a 90-minute documentary, which was quite helpful. But he really, really cherishes mime.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But he made his first film in 1968, and it was called Fondo y Lis. And the plot of this movie is wild. So in this movie, like Fondo and his paralyzed lover Lis journey across a desert looking for the mythical city of Tar and encounter a eclectic group of people. And this is the exact plot summary I found. A gang of transvestites. It's a thing too when we say transvestites and like that time period. I'm like, oh well, yeah. Are these cross-dressers or are they like transgender people? You know, I don't know if it distinguishes between the two, but nevertheless.
Well, and the problem is they're always conflated.
Yes, but nevertheless, transvestites, blood drinkers, and a man playing a burning piano. Unsurprisingly, it was very controversial in 1968, so much so that the country of Mexico banned it until 1972.
As you do.
As you do. But his next film, 1970's El Topo, is what really put him on the map, or brought him worldwide notoriety. You can decide. It is an acid western, which I had to look up. It's like a mix of like spaghetti western and traditional western, but it's saturated with sex, violence, and religious symbolism that sees the gunfighter El Topo, played by Jodorowsky himself, cross the desert with his naked son, played by Jodorowsky's son Brontes, who is in Santa Sangre as one of the nurses at the beginning of the film.
Oh, okay, okay.
But he leaves his son behind to go on, again, another quest for enlightenment. It's characterized, though, by its bizarre characters and occurrences, the use of maimed and dwarf performers, and heavy doses of Judeo-Christian symbolism and Eastern philosophy. But, and this was the interesting thing about this movie, well, maybe not interesting, but controversial, but there was a big controversy surrounding El Topo, because there was a scene where El Topo rapes a woman, and I guess, like, Jodorowsky did an interview and like talked about the making of the scene and essentially implied that he actually raped this woman.
Oh no.
Well, and it was the thing because he was describing how they filmed the scene. He's like, you know, it was just me and her and the photographer and blah, blah, blah. But I think what he was trying to say was like the scene was so intense, the filming of it was so intense that it was as if he actually raped her. But post Me Too, like he was supposed to have this like big like exhibit at a museum. And when that quote came out, they canceled his exhibit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you would.
But it's also considered to be the first ever midnight cult movie, as the only way to see it for decades was at midnight screenings in art house theaters, and it is considered by many, including Roger Ebert, to be a masterpiece.
Okay. I'm going to say okay, and I'm going to back away slowly.
I know. We're not talking about that film, but it doesn't kind of make me, again, like, interested to see it. Next comes 1973's The Holy Mountain, which is, again, the only one of his films that I had heard of before. But this is about a powerful alchemist, again, played by Jodorowsky himself, who leads a messianic character and 7 materialistic figures to the Holy Mountain, and they, again, hope to achieve enlightenment. Do you sense a theme here, Joe?
Just a little bit, yeah.
So it was after this that he tried to get Frank Herbert's Dune adapted to the screen. And everyone, you can go watch the 2013 documentary Jodorowsky's Dune for more information on that.
I highly, highly recommend it. It is fascinating.
Oh, see, and now that I'm into Dune, like, I do want to see it now.
Yeah.
But after that, he moved on to his 1980 film Tusk, a children's film set in British colonial India about the attachment between a young English girl and an elephant, both born on the same day. But the thing with this one, Jodorowsky was dissatisfied with the film's technical deficiencies and later disowned it, though in an interview on Santa Sangre, he pretty much says he only wanted to make that movie because he was fascinated with elephants.
Okay, as we will see in this film.
Yes, like but the exact anecdote he gave, it's like he's really into chakras, and there's some kind of like tantric chakra where like the design of like, you know, like tattoos on a body, the elephant is always like in the taint area between the balls and the asshole, and
sure,
he thought he wanted to know why, so he just got really into elephants for a while and made a children's movie about it.
Oh no. These are not words that should go together.
I know, but then he goes on to be like, hey, when you ride an elephant, like it's like you're riding the elephant, and like the motions and like the feeling in your taint area. I don't think he says taint, but he says that area between your balls and butthole.
Wow. Also, you know, let's just pursue this for a moment. Is it really going to be that different than riding a horse or say a camel or something? Like, is an elephant that unique?
Well,
I have questions.
I would argue, I mean, again, like you're going into mysticism here. So I think it's more so also like about the animal's aura and like what the spirit that they're putting out there. So the spirit of an elephant is absolutely different than the spirit of a camel, you know?
That is fair, yes. And there is a certain intellectualism that we attribute to elephants. You know, they're typically treated as wise animals who have a strong capacity for empathy and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Now, it shouldn't surprise you, though. So, like, you know, he goes on another hiatus until he made Santa Sangre in 89. And so for all of the 80s, he developed a form of personal therapy that he called psychomagic, which combined the insights of Jungian psychology and the tarot. He was an avid tarot reader, and for years performed weekly mass readings. He even like brings them up in his interviews on this Blu-ray.
Oh my God, Trace, Jodorowsky's tarot.
Yeah, right?
Somebody who actually knows what the fuck they're talking about and would give us surrealistic imagery.
Yeah, exactly.
Where's that remake?
So, okay. That's the thing. You know, I thought he had made many more films, but he really hasn't made that many films. So, the genesis of Santa Sangre kind of starts in a few places. First, Claudio Argento, Dario's brother, had been trying to track down Jodorowsky in Paris. Remember, this is before the internet, because he like didn't know where he lived, and eventually he found out that, oh, he's in Paris. I have to go there.
There we go.
At this point in time, he had split from his brother Dario after 1982's Tenebrae. Not because of any like bad thing. He just wanted to go off and like do his own work and produce his own films. Yeah. And one of these things he wanted to do was a project with specifically Jodorowsky because he loved El Topo and The Holy Mountain.
Okay.
But he wanted him to direct an esoteric medieval epic called The Templars that would have been a huge production. And this idea was pretty much immediately derailed because of its huge costs, and distributors didn't think Jodorowsky was a bankable enough name to justify the budget.
I mean, kind of fair. The two titles that you talked about that he's best known for are niche. They are cult. They are not going to make you a ton of money.
I mean, again, like he's known as like creating the Midnight movie. So yeah, like I don't think general audiences know this name. Also, I don't think medieval stuff is like necessarily attractive to at any time period.
Well, I don't know. I feel like some people are now going to come at you and say, oh no, there was a period of time where we were very much in, like, depends on how you want to classify, because even things like Sword and Sandals could fall into that, and some of those were very popular.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking like specifically like King Arthur type shit. Like,
right.
I guess, okay, there have been successful medieval films, obviously, but I don't think we've ever had like a wave or like a steady flow of that particular subgenre.
It's not a guaranteed box office draw.
Exactly. Look at every single attempt to do King Arthur in the past 20 years.
Okay, but most of those are shit. Let's just be clear.
Yeah, well, yeah. But nevertheless, so even though this project fell through, it at least allowed Argento to develop a relationship with Jodorowsky. Now, at the same time, co-screenwriter Roberto Leone had an idea. He had been obsessed with this concept of a demon forgetting that it used to be an angel. Because, Joe, I don't know if you know this, but like in Christianity, like demons are angels that were cast down from heaven that sided with Satan in the war against God.
I do know that, yes.
Okay, cool. But this led him to wonder, is it possible that someone can be so cruel and nasty enough that they can forget any form of humanity that they had, i.e. a demon forgetting that it was an angel once? Or can a serial killer involve the audience in his drama to make us feel more pity for him than for his victims? So...
every Hollywood film ever.
Well, and I guess, though, because this is the 80s, it's kind of like...
It's a bit fresher, yeah.
Well, they don't ever mention the slasher boom, too. And again, that's very much American, like the slasher boom. But,
Truly.
Dealing with Italian producers, we can talk about Giallo as well. So I wonder if they're thinking specifically, I want to do a movie about a serial killer, but not like a slasher type movie,
Right. And something that explores the psychology and sees if we can get the audience to empathize with him, which I would argue is what we're getting here.
Oh, well, so he wanted to make the public participate in the killer's tragedy. So he wrote a story treatment with this premise and wanted to direct it himself, but he went to Argento to get the ball rolling, and Argento still really wanted to work with Jodorowsky, but he also wanted to be taken seriously internationally. So when Leone brought in the script, he was like, hey, I don't really think you should direct this, but Jodorowsky is a name that I think would get people
Open
to take
doors.
This seriously. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So he was the obvious choice.
Okay. Interesting. Still not quite seeing the obviousness of it, but I do love that people respect him and his films so strongly that they immediately think, oh, well, he would bring something to the table.
Yes. So oddly enough, Jodorowsky also had a story that would merge with Leone's story and become Santa Sangre because, okay, this is wild. To make ends meet in his early career in the mid-'60s, so before he made his first film, he became a comic strip artist for a right-wing newspaper and did a page called Fabulas Panicas for 5 years.
Okay.
He would deliver his drawing to the newspaper every day, and one day, while he was getting coffee, this guy walks up to him, sits at his table, and tells him, oh my god, I love Fabulas Panicas. It turns out this man was Goyo Cardenas, and this man was a Mexican serial killer.
Oh.
The first widely publicized Mexican serial killer who killed 17 women in the 1940s.
Shit. Okay.
But here's the thing. So he was put in a mental hospital for 10 years and was released, got married, became a lawyer and a novelist. And
I'm sorry. Let's backtrack. Did you just say 10 years for killing more than 12 people?
Yes.
More than 15 people?
Okay, that's the thing. So he went on to tell Jodorowsky, he was a good guy now because he was granted redemption by God. And
oh, no.
This was one of the first cases of this type of rehabilitation. It was widely publicized. He was like, look, therapy and mental institutions work. We can cure serial killers.
I mean, I do believe therapy works, but maybe not therapy driven by God.
Well, this serial killer lived a full and happy life and was a successful lawyer. And again, writing books and shit. So you can probably go read one of his books. It's probably not called How to Kill Women, but
Wow, Trace.
This interaction fascinated Jodorowsky. And so, he thought, how can a murderer, through different psychological or magic ways, forget his crimes and have a nice life? So, of course, he thought, well, I can make a movie out of this because Jodorowsky believes that our society is criminal. We are poisoning the planet. We are killing people. We have wars. But maybe, just maybe, one day, everything will be forgiven by God and humanity will have its redemption. So he wanted to do a micro level of that with one serial killer.
Okay. Yeah, it's probably important at this point to note that all of his films do have this kind of religious component. And as you noted, it tends to intersect with a search for enlightenment or the divine. So this is very much on his wavelength.
Absolutely. So Argento sent Leone's story to Jodorowsky's agent, who said that he found the project interesting, but he wanted to meet with Leone first, just the writer, and be like, hey, come over here to Paris and we're going to talk and we're going to do this. Right. So Leone goes to Paris and they talked in a bar, and Jodorowsky playfully accused him of stealing his idea because they had two very similar ideas.
Right.
But they got along very well and they finished an outline without any issues, though Leone would frequently ask him to explain every hidden meaning whenever he wanted to add something more, and I quote, Jodorowsky style. For example, the mother, Concha, in the film was originally an armless dwarf, which Argento and Leone removed, as well as softening other parts of it to make it a bit more commercial, which again, I wouldn't call this a commercial film, but compared to what it sounds like his other films are, it is his most commercial film.
Yes, that.
But Argento did fight with Jodorowsky about the ending because Jodorowsky didn't want a happy ending, but Argento thought that they owed the audience a positive, happy resolution after what they had just sat through, so he fought for it. And eventually, Jodorowsky praised his choice and agreed to have the ending be the one where, Phoenix finally comes to his senses for love. But I mean, right. It's a happy ending that, like, it's a personal victory for Phoenix, but he's still going to prison.
Exactly. Yeah.
When it comes to casting, okay, this is wild.
You mean half the cast can be my family members?
Well, guess who he wanted? So Argento wanted Angelica Houston and Jack Nicholson to play Phoenix's parents, Concha and Orgo.
Whoa. Okay,
yes.
That would have been interesting.
Yep. But so they wanted too much money, so it wasn't going to happen.
Right.
But Jodorowsky didn't want any famous actors, which seems to be a trend, by the way, with like these like high. Because I get a lot of Kubrick out of Jodorowsky, and that's how it feels to me. Like a lot of these like big time directors don't want to, or sorry, these very visionary directors don't want to deal with quote unquote stars or celebrities.
Well, I wonder if it's just I'm the driving creative force of this train and I don't need other people trying to derail it with their own personalities or the things that they think they need to do because they are quote unquote stars.
Well, or even like, hey, if you're making a movie and it's art, like you don't want a celebrity to be like the attention grabber of a film when it's like everything else going on the screen,
Yeah, it's so contrary to how we make movies nowadays, because how do you make a movie if you can't market it using a big name star?
I mean, I have two minds about that, though, because I mean, sometimes, like, I mean, obviously movies flop, but I feel like just it depends on the marketing campaign, really. I mean, I don't think you need a big name for success, but they don't hurt a film, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right. Yes. I guess from a Suits perspective, like from a studio and marketing perspective, if you don't have a famous mug that you can put on a poster, it just, I think, makes it harder for them to envision, well, why would people come in to see this movie?
Mm-hmm. So for Phoenix, apt name, by the way, Jodorowsky had his sons do it because A, he wanted to, and B,
cheap.
They were actually talented. So Axel, who goes by Cristobal Jodorowsky, who plays the older Phoenix, he went to Marcel Marceau's 3-year school of mime and studied pantomime, theater, fencing, acrobatics, dance, recitation, singing, like the works.
In the word of showgirls, this movie's called Santa Sangre. It's not called all of those things. But sidebar, he is legitimately very good in this.
He is very good in this. He tragically died like 2 years ago, by the way. I think he was like in his late 50s, so I don't know what went on there. But then Adon Jodorowsky, who plays the younger Phoenix, he had also been trained. So their father was confident in casting them. And as I said, one of his older sons, Teo, plays the pimp in the film who gives all the cocaine to all the Down syndrome characters. Yep. He sadly died in an accident in 1995, and because of that, Jodorowsky actually can't watch this movie anymore, though he admits that it is his favorite of all of his films.
I mean, he also only has like a handful, so he doesn't have that many he can watch.
Exactly. Not really much else about the casting, although Sabrina Dennison, who is the adult Amma, I do want to point out that she is actually deaf.
Oh, wow. Okay, we've got some disabled representation. That feels rare.
And she's got interviews in the Blu-ray, too, with a translator.
Wow, okay, that's...
Oh,
I'm like, when have I ever seen that? I don't think ever.
Everyone involved, like the tattooed woman, the woman that plays Concha, Orgo. Because Guy Stockwell had died by that point. But like, pretty much every like little person that was in this movie, like they could have, like, they got to interview. But Fabiola Elenka Tapia, who plays young Alma, she is not deaf in real life.
Okay.
But all in all, there were about 8 months between planning the film and actually shooting it. The budget they were given was not a lot.
Mm-hmm.
According to Jodorowsky, it was about 4 billion lira, which today, I went on a journey with this, Joe. It would convert to about $540,000, which in 1989 would have been a little over $200,000. So...
Yeah.
Not a big budget film. Argento covered part of the budget and got co-financing from Mexico to cover the remaining budget.
Okay.
Now, they shot on location in Mexico City, which was kind of a surprise because, get this, after filming El Topo and the Holy Mountain there, Mexican authorities hated Alejandro Jodorowsky.
Right.
Like, in the sense that they pushed him out of the country and made him leave. So he wasn't, like, legally allowed back in the country.
He's like, hey, guys, look the other way. I'm just going to sneak in, make a cutie little movie, and then I'll be out of your way again. So, I mean, okay, the reason there are 8 hours of bonus features on this Blu-ray is because, we have the 90-minute documentary, but then there's all these interviews, and all the interviews are, like, 30 to 40 minutes long. Yeah.
which I didn't realize the movie was in English, so I was pleasantly surprised, but all these interviews are in Spanish or Italian.
Oh, wait, so did you watch this with the English dub? Because I absolutely turned on the subtitles. I was just like, no, I'm not doing it.
Wait, there wasn't, this movie is in English. Like, the dub is not a dub. It was released in English.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, I just watched it with subtitles because I was like, I hate dubbing so much.
Wait, but like, so were they speaking Spanish when you watched it?
Yeah.
That's so, but I don't, that wasn't the default option for me.
It was not. I had to change it.
Oh, okay. So, I think this was dubbed in English, but like that's how it was released. Like similar to how like Italian giallo films are dubbed, but like not like over the, you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. And that does make sense because I had read that this was his first English film, but then I read that it was dubbed. So I was just like, oh, I don't do dubbing if I don't have to.
Right. Now, in his interviews, Jodorowsky was like, oh, it was weird because, everyone cooperated with me when I came back to Mexico. The authorities, the unions, I had no problems. I guess they got over it.
Mm-hmm.
But in one of these interviews with executive producer Angelo Iacono, he goes, oh no, it was me. I had the connections that allowed Jodorowsky to return to Mexico.
AKA, I paid off a shit ton of people so we could make this movie.
Exactly. But this shoot sounds like a trip. So, for example, Axel, the oldest brother, I'm sorry, the one that plays older Fenix, he lived in a hotel room with an eagle for an entire month, and it was loose in the room, so he didn't even keep it in a cage. Like the room was the cage, and it shit everywhere to the point where the staff wouldn't even come in and clean the room, and it just smelled so bad, and he just lived in this room with this eagle.
As you do.
As you do. According to Argento, every little detail and situation Jodorowsky put into the film was real. Like, he's actually shooting in the streets of Mexico City, and the sex workers in the film were all real. The church in the beginning was made with the money of the sex workers.
What?
Yeah. The local thieves were their guardians because they were worried about, they're just shooting in this city, and there were thieves and like violence and crime everywhere. And so they reached out, they got in touch with the head of the thieves, and they said, hey, can you have your thieves not steal our shit? Like, just have them protect us and we'll give you X amount of money. And that's the thieves were protecting their equipment.
That is wild. That is full on guerrilla filmmaking, isn't it?
Now, Argento is quick to point out, though, that Jodorowsky doesn't care about realism, as he considered it a mere imitation of reality. So I don't think he thinks that you can even capture realism on film because it's not real.
It's not real.
By putting it on film, it makes it not real. But there was also tension as well. So as I said, I get a lot of Kubrick vibes from Jodorowsky. Axel says his father is very histrionic. And at one point, I'm saying, now that we have multiple Jodorowskys, I'm going to start using their first names. But
Good call.
But Axel says his father is very histrionic. And at one point, Alejandro was showing Axel what to do for a scene. But Axel was like, well, I don't want to watch you because if I watch you act it out, then I'm just going to mimic you and I don't want to do that.
Right.
So Alejandro got really offended and they had this big blow up fight and didn't speak to each other for the rest of the production.
Oh, no.
So Alejandro would tell his assistant director, hey, go tell the actor over there to do this, and the assistant director would go over and be like, well, the director wants you to do this, and he's like, well, go tell the director that I want. It was that for a good chunk of the filming.
Oh my god, no. It's like a bad game of telephone mixed with petty school rivalry bullshit.
Kind of definitely male ego. But wow. After shooting wrapped, Axel fled to Bali and didn't speak to his dad for a month until all of a sudden Alejandro calls him out of the blue, acting like everything's fine. Be like, oh my god, hey, what's going on? How are you doing? Oh, hey, we have to reshoot some scenes. Can you come back to Mexico City?
I'm not actually apologizing. I just need you physically back on set.
And Axel went back and they were fine. But then Sabrina Dennison, who plays the adult Alma, she says how she was very frustrated during one moment of filming because she wasn't understanding what Jodorowsky was telling her to do. And apparently he's not always the best at that kind of communication. And so she started to approach him, and everyone on set was like, oh my god, don't do that. And she basically went and was like, what, signing to him, what do you want me to do? I don't understand. But he took that as a moment of gumption and ballsiness. So he and her got along really well because he respected her.
He respected her. Yeah. Because she didn't tolerate his shit.
Exactly. Now, towards the end of filming, they had someone on staff make a rough cut, which was eventually thrown out when they actually hired an editor. But because, again, it seems like a lot of this was they were just kind of shooting on the fly. This at least allowed them to figure out how scenes worked together and pieced together. So when the actual editor, Mauro Bonanni, started editing, he was actually already editing with pre-edited footage because the uncredited editor had already put some stuff together for him.
Wow.
So I kind of clued you into this when I was talking to you offline, Joe, but like I kept getting big Perdita Durango vibes from this movie. And at first I was just like, okay, well maybe just because it's a Mexican film. So like it kind of has that kind of like hot, like bright color to it. They share a composer. So Simon Boswell, who scored Santa Sangre and Perdita Durango, and Argento's Phenomena, Bava's Demons 2, Michelle Suave's Stage Fright, and also The Crying Game, and Clive Barker's Lord of Illusions. Oh, shit. Okay. This is an impressive resume. Very impressive resume. He hasn't really done much since much of note since Perdita Durango, but like that run from like 85 to 99 was Jesus. Yeah, solid. Yes. And Santa Sangre got a worldwide release, which doesn't usually happen with Jodorowsky's films. It played 20 to 22 film festivals and won 12 to 13 first prizes. According to Argento, the UK release was fine. The US release saw slight cuts because they wanted to have the largest audience possible. And so, it was rated NC-17 for, quote-unquote, several scenes of extremely explicit violence. Okay. An edited version was released with an R rating for, and I quote, bizarre graphic violence and sensuality and for drug content. Okay. But, like, it didn't get a wide release in the US, so, like, only screening at a few theaters, like, again, familiar with Jodorowsky's previous work. But the cutting of the film really aggravated Jodorowsky because, you know, like, distributors were asking him, like, well, what would the public say? And his reply was something along the lines of, I don't care about the public. I don't make my movies for them. I don't care how my movies are received. You know what? That's the exact right response that more filmmakers should be having. Well, yeah, filmmakers are going to have that, but the suits aren't going to have that. Well, and the MPAA. Well, yeah, for sure. And it mostly played well, though, in all the countries it was released in. But Argento laments because, again, he's trying to like break into his own, like, and like kind of establish his name in Italian cinema, like the same way his brother was. This isn't going to do it for him, is it? Well, this movie flopped in Italy. It was the only place that it really flopped in because, so the distributor there didn't care about the movie and practically like shelved it. But when it did come out, no one liked it. Argento attributed it to the fact that he thinks, okay, this is the weird thing to me. So he says, Italian viewers didn't accept how unrealistic the film was. They didn't they didn't like how absurd and obscure it was. And he then like lists off like certain like, you know, like giallo films. And I was like, sir, those aren't realistic. Sir, this is the pot calling the kettle black. It's so wild. But either way, there were outstanding results everywhere else the film went, and it became a cult film in the US and the UK. Reception, again, was positive. We're looking at 86% on Rotten Tomatoes with an average score of 7.4 out of 10. Letterboxd users have given it an 8 out of 10. And I'll just toss in Ebert's quote here, because Ebert did like this movie, but he said, because I want to bring this up, because he's comparing it again to like the slasher boom of the time. Oh, I read this review because they republished it, I think, Ebert's site goes through like revisions where they'll re-promote old reviews of his that the staff really like. So this was one of them. And yeah, as always, we're doing this like, hey, here's a backhanded compliment to horror. So Roger Ebert said that he believed Santa Sangre carried the moral message of genuinely opposing evil rather than celebrating it like most contemporary horror films. He described it as a horror film, one of the greatest. And after waiting patiently through countless dead teenager movies, that was his name for the slasher film. Yeah, he was reminded by Alejandro Jodorowsky that true psychic horror is possible on the screen. Horror, poetry, surrealism, psychological pain, and wicked humor all at once. And I don't disagree with his assessment of this film. Yeah. I just hate that he comes down so hard on fucking slasher films. Yeah, it's the bullshit that he throws at other films. You could have just said, here's what this film is doing well that I liked about it. You don't have to say, and I'm punching down on other films that I don't like. Pretty much, yeah. But nevertheless, I mean, you know, this is considered like a masterpiece of its time. It's funny though, right? I mean, so you haven't seen his other films, so you don't know how this stacks up, but we have both said this was surprisingly commercial, you know? I don't think this is going to be everybody's cup of tea, but what film is... It's a bit bizarre to me. Like, I don't know that I would call this film a masterpiece, having seen The Holy Mountain, because that one is so much more confronting and avant-garde and just, it really fucking goes for it. This is a very different film. I'm not going to say it's safer, but it does feel like, hey, let's get this in front of the masses. It's going to be slightly different. But yeah, I mean, I think if people have sampled international horror films, they're probably going to watch this and say, that's really interesting. It's good.
But I don't think they're going to call it a masterpiece.
I mean, but I do think it's a film though. Like, I feel like most films that I would call a masterpiece, they're films I don't like think that immediately because they're films that I sit with them
they
after
sneak
a
up
while.
on you.
Yeah, and like it's like the more I sit with them, and yes, multiple viewings do help, but sometimes it's even if I've just seen it once, but it's like, oh, a week later, I'm still thinking about that movie, you know?
Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, I don't want to sound like I don't enjoy this film. I really enjoyed this film. I gave it a 4 out of 5. So I'm definitely in line with the stats that you quoted. For me, it's the visuals that's going to stick with me. I think so much, like we've already praised how beautiful it is. Folks, it's a heavy price tag, but this Severin release, I cannot overstate how gorgeous the transfer is.
Yeah. Oh, and we are not getting paid for this.
We are not getting paid for that.
That was something else I thought too, because Argento, like he's adamant about how this movie has nothing like really Italian about it. It has nothing to do with Italian cinema. It's very much more of a Mexican film. But I was like, I mean, I think the tattooed woman's death screams giallo.
Oh yeah, that is by far the most horror-esque sequence. And then also, yes, the blood splatter feels like this perfect combination between 80s gore sensibility from America and then Italian giallo.
But then, like, I'm jumping like ahead to the end because I know we're going to start the plot soon, but like whenever all the corpses come out of the ground and they're all painted white because that's his thing, like that also felt very
well, it felt almost kabuki Japanese.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and I get, that's the white face makeup. And I felt really bad because I thought the actress playing young Alma was an Asian actress, but it's just because she's painted white, but she's a Mexican actress. But I was getting kabuki or like something like Kobayashi's Kwaidan a little bit out of that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I saw a lot of influences in here. Although again, I almost feel like Jodorowsky would be offended by saying influence because I feel like this is his unique singular vision.
Well, it's interesting, though. I mean, I don't doubt that he would probably say, no, this is 100% me. This is what I wanted to put on the screen. But when you start to dig into reviews, people draw deep in terms of comparisons to other people. Like I've seen people say, oh, this has Fellini-esque elements to it. Mm-hmm. So maybe, you know what? Maybe I should walk it back. Maybe people are seeing this as a masterpiece and rightfully so.
I mean, it's one of his later masterpieces, at least.
Right.
But yeah, okay. So, Joe, what happens in this movie?
Okay, folks, buckle up. Here we go. So we open in what I call a zoo-like room at an asylum because it reminded me of, folks, if you've ever been to the zoo, we've got, plexiglass, we've got a tree, we've got a tire swing, a little bit of water. It just looks like where you would throw an animal in for observation. And yeah, we're introduced to Fenix, who is played by Axel Jodorowsky, and he's naked and feral. They have to coax him out of a tree using fish.
Well, because they try to get him to eat regular food first, and he's like, nuh-uh. And Joe, I literally wrote in my notes, I was like, they show him a fish that he eats like Mr. Tusk.
Right. Yeah.
So then when I found out Jodorowsky actually made a film called Tusk, but albeit a very different one, I was like, oh,
yes.
Synchronicity.
Whereas I thought Penguin from Batman and Returns.
Oh, yeah. That'll do it. But this is merely an appetizer because we have a 40-minute flashback to go through.
Truly, yes. So that's where we go. We have an eagle that flies into the city, and this is our transition into the past as we see people lining the streets for the Circus Gringo parade that's going by. And when we go inside the tent, we see that the clowns are watching the circus owner, Orgo, who is played by Guy Stockwell, and he is flirting heavily with the tattooed woman. Not gonna lie, this was annoying from a note-taking perspective. I really wanted to give this woman a name.
I agree with you. And fun fact, too, so obviously she is not actually tattooed.
Right.
So the first thing they tried to do, I don't remember what it was, but it affected her body, like an allergic reaction type way, like it was toxic. Okay. So they had to switch it, but they ended up using like Bic color pens. But Joe, like that's not permanent in any shape, way, or form. So
you got to redo it all the time.
They redo it all the time. They had to know how the angles of the shots were going to be done, so they could at least touch up the part that was going to be showing. But the other side might not be good. This woman couldn't shower for 7 weeks.
Oh my goodness, no.
Yeah, not even kidding.
This is why you take photos and you hire a professional makeup artist.
I mean, Joe, their budget was $200,000.
This is fair.
I mean, again, she's on this interview too. She's acting all happy about it. But she's like, oh, when I could finally shower, I was it was heavenly.
You would feel that for sure.
I just think about her hair too. Like, I mean, her hair must have been so disgusting.
And it's hot. We're talking Mexico, so the temperature's not going to be particularly cold, except maybe at night.
Maybe.
In any case, the tattoos are fantastic. Like, she's called the tattooed lady because they cover almost every inch of her body, and they're bright, they're colorful. You know, she's very vivacious because that's part of the deal, right? So we're seeing her mostly in a bikini for her scenes in the film.
Pretty much, yeah.
I didn't say, but this is actress Thelma T.U. So, interestingly enough, the way that Orgo and the tattooed woman are flirting is via his knife-throwing act. So, you know, he's like, here, stand up on my American flag board, and I'm going to throw knives at you, and you can lick them, and we'll basically anticipate fucking later.
Yeah, no, like this entire sequence is basically their foreplay.
It's great, though.
Oh, it's really cool. Like, so, you said she licks it. Like, so one of the knives goes like next to her cheek, and she just turns and just licks it up and down. And of course, the final one goes right between her legs.
Between the legs. Yeah. Yep. Nothing Freudian about anything in this film.
Yeah, she is very performatively moaning. I mean, you could argue she has an orgasm during this scene.
Yeah, more or less. It's graphically sexual, and of course, this is all filtered through the young Fenix's perspective. So you get the impression that he understands, but also doesn't understand because he's at that point where sexuality is still a bit of a mystery. Like, he's got a crush on young Alma, but it is chaste. Like, we're doing it through sleight of hand magic.
I know. When we were saying like Jungian, I think there's also a bit of Freud psychoanalysis in here because like a lot of what Fenix is experiencing or seeing in this 40-minute like flashback is going to play a part in the more like psychedelic aspects of the last part of the film.
Well, it completely informs who he becomes as an adult.
Right, but even like, you know, there's some imagery in the back half that you're kind of like, why is that there? It's just probably because he's pulling it from his youth.
Yes, and his memories so heavily inform how he experiences the world as an adult. It's almost like he's trying to replicate moments from the past.
Very much so, yes.
Yeah, so we have talked about young Alma. She is deaf-mute. She is the tattooed woman's either daughter or adopted daughter. I saw differences depending on whose reviews I was reading. But the tattooed woman clearly doesn't have a lot of love and affection for her daughter because she basically just wants her to do a flaming trapeze act. And shockingly enough, this little girl is not super comfortable with it.
Not at all. Fun fact, too, alma means soul in Spanish.
Oh. Okay, so this is our introduction to the Circus Gringo, but then there's a commotion happening outside, Trace. So the police have drawn up battle lines on one side. They are opposing religious protesters who are dressed in these red cloaks. I'm going to say religion. You could say culty. They're giving off similar vibes.
Yeah, I mean, all religions are a cult, but
yeah.
and I know cult has a negative connotation to it, but like, you know,
well, it's because the film suggests that this is a bit of a made-up religion.
Well, but aren't all religions made up?
I mean, hey, you were the one who was religious, not me.
No. I don't mean made up as in, it's not real, but I mean, like, at one point, someone created, like, they made up the religion, you know?
That seems like it could get you into trouble.
Maybe it could. But nevertheless, yes, this feels very cult-like, and you're right, the robes really play into it. Also, you know, maybe the giant pool of blood in the middle of the church.
Well, yeah. So this group is being led by Fenix's mother. She is also the trapeze artist for the circus, and her name is Concha. She's played by Blanca Guerra. So they're on the other side opposing these police officers because they want to tear down their church. And so Trace, just as your fun fact, so Concha is Mexican slang for vagina.
Okay, because I know it literally translates to shell because like a conch. Yeah. That's really funny. Vagina. Okay.
Yeah. Which again, if you're reading into this from a psychological perspective, the vagina's got the hold on him the whole time. Okay, so yeah, we've got these two opposing groups battling it out, and then we've got the Monsignor, who is played by Sergio Bustamante, arrives in his limousine in purple robes, very, very striking. And he has come for a tour of Concha's church. So she tearfully relates the story of their saint. And the reason I said this is made up is because this is not a saint that the Monsignor subscribes to.
Well, because the Vatican has to like assign a saint. Like, right. They have to, you can't just say someone's a saint because of whatever. Like, they have to go through an approval process after they have died.
Right. And clearly we have not done that.
No.
I think Concha has probably invited him here in the hopes that he will facilitate that process. So she tells him the story of Lirio, who is a young girl whose arms were cut off before she was raped and she was left to die. And we see that there's a number of different tableaus as we relate this story. So yeah, they've tried to make this into a place of worship, including the aforementioned pool of blood. And the Monsignor is he finds it sacrilegious because he says, well, this is red paint. And she says, no, it's not. It's Santa Sangre. It is holy blood.
So I wanted to ask you, because I actually didn't look this up, why is the film called Santa Sangre or Holy Blood? When that's not really, and maybe I'm wrong here, but that's not really like the focal point of the film, except for this particular like plot.
Well, okay. So, as I mentioned, I do think that Jodorowsky is very interested in religion as well as enlightenment and so on. And I think that you could argue that both of those themes pervade the film, but I'm going to say that the holy blood in this case is actually Fenix. He is the one who is carrying his mother's holy blood as the kind of vessel. And that's why we get a lot of Adam and Eve, right? He is the result of the sin between his mother and his father, but he carries the burden of the sins of both his father and his mom.
But why does Concha have I thought the holy blood belonged to Lirio?
It does. I think this is just our kind of introduction into religion in this world and this family.
Got it. And they also have this effigy of Lirio, and it's this armless mannequin.
Yep. And folks, if you thought we were going to get out of this movie without cutting somebody's arms off, you have not been paying attention to the signs.
That also feels very giallo-y too, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah. So I'm going to bring in a reference here. I found an interesting article by Cian Sang called Santa Sangre, Finding Salvation in Sacrilege for a site called Blood Knife. And Sang says this: the frescoes within the Santa Sangre church are the storybook illustrations on which Concha raises her child, gruesome scenes which depict dismemberment as martyrdom. Death and dismemberment, we sense, are the sorts of experiences that Concha would want for her child to purify and sanctify him.
Oh. So
if you think about it, it's not just that Fenix is remembering these kinds of things. These are very much the instrument with which he is, I guess, living his life, right? Like, these are the testaments which were instilled upon him by his love for his mother because he sees such horrible things happen to her.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the thing, right? Because, like, we'll talk about it when we get to the actual, like, murdering stuff.
Right. Yes. Okay. So Monsignor and Concha are fighting about this pool of blood. He ends up leaving. The church is immediately bulldozed.
With Concha inside of it, so I thought we were losing her at this point in the movie.
Me too, yeah. It very much seems like she would have happily gone down for it, like, I'm willing to die for my religious beliefs, except for the fact that Fenix pulls her away, and then we see her, sort of walking down the street, and we get a lot of parades of various sorts in this film, particularly in the early parts. But it's like her and Fenix clutching her, and then we've got these clowns that have a tendency to sort of appear, and they don't have any lines because, Jodorowsky and mimes, but also they seem almost like a Greek chorus where they will accompany characters or they will provide the musical soundtrack to help guide us or sense what is happening or what we should be feeling.
I love when films employ Greek choruses,
yeah.
No, that's like sophomore English reading like, Antigone and shit like that.
Right, yeah. And we also have another character, which is Aladdin, played by Jesus Juarez. And this is I've seen some people say that he's the little person's servant of Fenix. And it's tricky because he doesn't really have a strong personality. Like, he doesn't get an arc. He doesn't really get to say or do much. But I feel uncomfortable saying that that's his role in the film because he just seems to be more of a guide.
I read him more as a friend. Like, he was his childhood friend. I mean, and spoiler, everyone. Like in the present timeline, Aladdin isn't real. So, like, we only see him in this. Like, we only really have this character in this flashback. But yeah, he always, I guess, he does seem to be a support system for Phoenix. But yeah, he seems more to me as a friend than a servant. But maybe I'm wrong.
I like that. No, I'm willing to go along with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we head back to the circus and... well, the church has been destroyed and poor Concha is, losing everything that is important to her. Orga and the tattooed woman are basically just still eye-fucking the whole time.
She, does this thing where she gets on, she bends over and puts her hands on the ground and then, backs up, shuffles back and, just puts her ass in his face.
Yeah. It is not subtle.
Not so. It's kind of sexy.
So one of the other references that I saw, which I immediately thought of, and it's primarily because we are taking place at a circus, but a lot of these scenes in the flashback felt very reminiscent of Todd Browning's Freaks.
Oh, Joe, I've never seen it. I'm going to get that criterion, but I've never seen it.
Well, don't you worry, baby, because I'm going to make us program it.
I know. It's
essential.
Movie. I have heard so many things about Freaks. I've just never seen it.
Well, I guess the other interesting thing is that Jodorowsky does often tend to employ little people, quote unquote freaks, people who have amputations or they're on the margins of society. He likes to cast them in his movies. So I think that there's that kind of element as well. But I like that they're not treated in an othered fashion. They're just part of who you would experience if you went to Mexico City. You would see these people.
I also, you're going to laugh. I get a John Waters sensibility out of him because I don't know if you remember when we covered Female Trouble, there's the guy that could pop his eye out of its socket.
Right.
And John Waters just hired him because he wanted to put that in the movie. And that's kind of what he does with the earless man. I'm sorry, that's kind of what Jodorowsky does with the earless man in this movie.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a celebration of the uniqueness that they bring to either the production or the world.
Or you could say their queerness.
Hey. Okay, so yes, Orgo and the tattooed woman are eye-fucking. Concha obviously has an idea that this is going on because she does threaten them with a knife, but this only seems to rile them up. They are very much feeding on this. We're not being subtle, but also we're waving our business in front of everybody's eyes.
But then what happens next is the wildest thing. So because I don't know if we knew that Orgo was also the hypnotist of the circus.
No, we thought he was the knife thrower and we knew that he was sort of in charge because everybody's treating him with a lot of reverence.
So Concha goes off on him and is yelling at him, and then he hypnotizes her and just drags her out of the room.
Mm-hmm. So this is a rape.
Oh, 100%. Because truthfully, when I first watched this, I think I missed him hypnotizing her because I was taking notes. So
I did too.
I moved from this to her yelling at him to all of a sudden Phoenix is watching them fuck, and I was oh, this is weird. Why is she having sex with him? And then I watched it again. I was oh, yeah, she's hypnotized into having sex with him. So full on rape in this movie.
Yeah, but it's okay, so we're not seeing the actual rape, as you said, we're hearing it, and then as Orgo climaxes, we hear a monkey screech, and then we just smash cut to blood spewing out of a dying elephant's trunk.
Which is...
hello.
I thought this was a dummy trunk, and...
Yeah.
Okay, so everyone, in case you're worried about animal cruelty on this film, because we've covered...
As I was very worried.
And we've covered films that have harm real animals, thinking specifically of Wake and Fright here.
Yeah.
So I did look this up. This is from the American Humane's program, Humane Hollywood. It's also their website, humanehollywood.com. You can go check this. And they basically do reports. If you're doing a movie with an animal, you have to kind of file a report with these people. Or
right.
I don't know if it's mandatory or if it's optional, but I went and looked, and you can log your production on the site.
I think it's probably mandatory now, although I wasn't sure in a film that was made outside of North America in the 80s. So that's why I was worried.
Well, I didn't know if it was you have to go to this particular organization, or if there's plethora of them that you can go to get these certificates of hey, we didn't hurt our animals. But so this is their report on this, though. It says, in one of the circus scenes, an elephant is dying and blood pours from its trunk. The scene was staged with the elephant lying on its on its side. The elephant drank a pleasant-flavored thick liquid and expelled some through its trunk. In a later scene, scavengers break into the elephant's coffin and dismember the elephant. We'll get there in a minute. The dismembered parts were fake props. Now, here's the other thing, and we'll get there in a minute too, but there's a scene where chickens peck at a bloody arm, and then they're picking at feet placed on a prop. Right. Dogs lap up gravy-flavored stage blood.
Oh, okay.
But, we have snakes and birds and puppies and horses and pigeons. But the big one is, I know, animals all over this movie. But there is a scene that involves many chickens. And I think this is like one of the most like memorable like shots from the film.
Right.
But where chickens are just dropping from the ceiling, falling on the floor below. And they say, we have been unable to get any details on this scene. And because of the obvious potential for injury to the chickens, we're rating Santa Sangre questionable.
Yeah. So many scenes with animals that we can for sure say they were not harmed, but then there is that one. So we get a questionable rating.
Yeah. But I mean, like, again, like we don't see anything bad happen. The only animal that has harm come to it in the film is this elephant.
Right, which we know for sure was not actually harmed in real life.
Exactly. But, I mean, again, I thought this was a fake trunk. So that this is actually a real elephant, like, spewing red liquid is kind of neat.
Well, that's the thing, is this scene is frankly kind of amazing. Because we've got Fenix looking at the elephant and kind of, I think, putting too much weight. Like we're basically projecting onto the survival of the elephant as though it is maybe mom and dad's relationship or their marriage or something like that. But Fenix is praying for this elephant not to die, and Jodorowsky pulls the camera up slowly into this overhead aerial shot, and it really it captures the moment because we see that he's actually surrounded. He and the elephant are surrounded by the clowns and all the other people at the circus, and it's right in the middle of this busy street. It's a shot with a lot of gravity to it.
Very much. Oh, the overhead shot is beautiful. And again, it's something where the blood too just stands out because it's just so...
It's so red.
But again, there's color all around, but it really sticks out.
Yeah, it pops.
Pops, thank you.
So we are hearing music from the clowns during the scene, and then that music basically just goes through the cut. So we've got diegetic music that cuts right through multiple scenes. And we go from that to a funeral procession as we are carrying this elephant in a sarcophagus, a coffin.
I mean, but it's gorgeous. It's a big blue thing. Fuck. What is that device called? Like, when someone of royalty is being carried around a city and it's like they're in like a little like shack thing, but like it's on bars that people are holding it on.
Right. I know what you mean, and I don't know the name.
Well, anyway, there's a name for that thing, but that's what this coffin is. It's just gorgeous blue coffin sarcophagus thing. And then I was like, oh, we're really going with this elephant here. Boy, oh boy, do we follow this elephant on a journey.
Yeah, so it's a funeral march, kind of like what you might see in New Orleans.
Oh, they actually play Chopin's funeral march.
Oh, yeah. Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
So we walk it down the street, and then we arrive at the edge of a cliff, and we see that there are like 100 people who have been working. They've gathered. They're very excited. They're cheering. And we just tip the sarcophagus over the edge, and it falls to the bottom of this cliff. Like, it's got to be 100 feet down.
Think the final graboid's death in Tremors, where it just like dives off the cliff. That's what happens to this elephant sarcophagus.
But it doesn't explode on impact. It just kind of lands. And then all the people who look like workers, they look impoverished. They've smeared kind of soot on themselves. So it is, again, quite striking. They climb up, they beat open this sarcophagus, and then, we just start ripping this elephant apart and throwing the meat out to everybody.
And again, if y'all haven't seen this, like, we don't actually see them ripping the elephant apart. We don't see the elephant corpse at all, but it's more so like they go inside, and then when they come out, they're holding pieces of meat.
But again, right, this sort of lends almost a religious fervor to the proceedings. Like there's something ritualistic about this where we're celebrating the death by distributing the body out to the people. So like in death, good things can come, but also the violence is kind of horrifying.
But it's like, because these are also poverty-stricken people, so they actually are hungry.
They're going to eat it.
Like, they need to eat it. But yeah, there's something, and it's a thing where I could see someone looking at this and be like, well, why is this scene in this movie? Like, what does that have to do with the plot of the story? But I think it's like thematically tied into it.
Yeah, it doesn't directly inform the events of the narrative, but a lot of this movie is more about...
Well, I think it's also just a child experiencing that. I mean, we don't know at this point if Phoenix has ever experienced death before, so this could be the first like thing in his life that he has lost, and that it happens right before a shit show is about to happen is probably what helps him, or helps him is maybe the wrong term, but like leads him to becoming a psychopath.
Right, yeah. So... It's important that you say we don't know if he's ever experienced death, but we do know that it makes him emotional because on the walk back to the circus, he does cry, and his father takes note of this. And we've seen that he has a challenging relationship with his father. His father doesn't seem to care very much about him. It's very aloof. And I think Phoenix wants something more from the relationship. So when his dad says, you can't cry, you've got to toughen up, he takes him back and we cut the cloak off of him. So everybody's in their kind of black funeral garb. Mm-hmm. And Orgo cuts off this cloak with a knife, like one of his, I think, throwing knives. And then he proceeds to carve a phoenix into his son's chest with the dagger. He
tattoos him. And this is not the modern, jabbing needle tattoos. This is a fucking knife.
Yeah. And Phoenix is crying the whole time.
So, interesting enough, so Alejandro Jodorowsky, who plays young Phoenix, he asked his dad, should I be crying? And he was like, well, what do you want to do? And so he was like, well, I want to cry, but I need someone to help me. And so basically, either his dad or someone was below the table, constantly pinching his toes to make him cry.
Kind of method, but it sounds like a gentle method.
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing where I'm kind of like, I don't know if some of this stuff would really fly in today's movie making rules, but I mean,
but it's also a father directing his son, so it's harder to say, oh, well, he should know better, he should do it differently because, well, technically you are the legal guardian.
Well, and the son did ask for it, literally.
Oh my god, these are like the worst people.
I know, he's
really
bad. But, I will say though, because this is the one son of his that's still alive, and he's like a musician now. He grew up to be very attractive.
Oh my god, how did I know you were going to say that? Terrible, beyond the point. I'm going to bring Sang back in for this particular piece. So they say, Phoenix's chest tattoo depicting a phoenix, a mythical inscription sliced into his young body by his father, suggests supernatural rebirth, because of course you can't see a phoenix without thinking of rebirth. It's quite literally why we would introduce it.
Absolutely.
But it's a supernatural rebirth into masculinity from the ashes of perceived femininity. So this weakness of crying, showing emotion, and so on. That the boy can only become a man once he knows what torture is, once all that's sensitive and sentimental within him has been ruthlessly carved away.
Okay, that's fascinating. So that leads me to my next question then. So, everyone, we're covering this, and there is queerness in this movie outside of Phoenix, but do you read Phoenix as queer, Joe?
So I don't read Phoenix as queer in the conventional sense where, he is sexually attracted to other men or both men and women. It's not as black and white as a lot of other films where we would say, oh, this person's secretly gay and they just don't know it.
Right.
But obviously, folks, we've already mentioned that there's a lot of similarities between Phoenix and Norman Bates because of his relationship with his mother. So I think you can say the way that Phoenix is presented is coded effeminate. And in some cases, that's where we start to draw queerness. But I would argue it's the relationship that he has with his mom, where he seems almost to be possessed by a feminine spirit.
Yes. And the interesting, though, if we're going to compare Phoenix with Norman Bates, comparing Concha with Mrs. Bates, because Mrs. Bates was a nightmare. She did abuse Norman. And I don't, Concha's not that. But, that's what I find...
but it's Phoenix's perception of who Concha would become, right? And I think because of her religious undertones or even overtones, that's what he has internalized and that's what he is struggling with. So basically this movie is very much, oh, your parents can fuck you up as a child and it will turn you into, I don't want to say a monster because I don't think he is. I do actually empathize with the character as an adult a lot.
Oh, yeah.
But he is obviously very, very fucked up.
Well, yeah, but I also think it's because, how she acts around the tattooed woman, that's why he absorbs mother wants all women to die. Any woman I love, she wants them to die.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When it's just like, hey, just don't cheat on your wife.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the other bizarre part of this movie is that we can definitely say that Concha becomes a kind of villain because she's the one who encourages adult Fenix to kill other women.
Right.
But he is just as much messed up by the actions of his father, Orgo. Like, even Orgo cutting this symbol of the Phoenix into his chest, but then he dresses his son in a junior version of his own costume, as if to say, you will become me.
Yeah, I actually found it fascinating that we don't get any kind of, I mean, spoiler alert, everyone, like the twist of this. If you even want to, I mean, I think the movie just
I don't think it's a twist. Yeah, the film doesn't present it as such, right?
Well, but when it's revealed, like we do get, like, you know, we get the whole, like, oh, like, look at all these other scenes where it's like, she wasn't really there. So I do think it's presented as a big reveal, but I also think it's telegraphed intentionally earlier on.
100%.
But I find it interesting that we don't have any embodiment of Orgo.
No.
When Phoenix is an adult.
Yeah, which to me suggests, like, yeah, I do think that this is where we're playing with some murky stereotypes about queerness, like young boys who have effeminate qualities, but they also have this attraction or this entanglement with their mothers, like a mother complex. It's very Oedipal in that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, I mean, the other interesting thing that I thought, particularly since this is a foreign film, is the fact that Orgo's costume and the board that he throws the knives at are in the colors of the American flag.
Well, okay, but you said, like, this is called Circo del Gringo, which just translates to white people circus.
Yeah.
But again, it's in Mexico City, but I guess maybe it's meant for tourists, but although we don't really see any American tourists.
We don't really get a sense of who attends this, right? Like, we will see one performance under the big top, and I can't distinguish any of the people who are in attendance because the story ultimately isn't interested in them. But this does feel like a slightly, if we want to talk about an authoritarian figure who is imposing very masculine traditional qualities, I guess as somebody who often looks at American culture from the outside, this felt very much like, oh, okay, we are coding almost like American imperialism onto Orgo.
Right. Fun fact too. So Guy Stockwell, who plays Orgo, he is the brother of Dean Stockwell.
I thought so.
Who was in Dune, David Lynch's Dune.
Yes. That Dune connection. And of course also Quantum Leap.
Yes, of course that. I didn't watch that, but sure.
It's so good. Scott Bakula, a Lord of Illusions connection.
Yeah.
Not really. This is 6 Degrees.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. So, yes, let's get to this big top performance. So we see young Phoenix. He's performing a magic act. He's using Alma as his assistant. So he puts her into the box, covers it up, and out comes Mother, to which I said, oh, well, there's nothing Freudian about that at all.
Right? Oh, my God.
I did love this moment, though. So she comes out. She's in this gold bikini with her hair up in a braid. And then the braid in her hair gets hooked on to something so that she gets lifted up so that she can do her trapeze act. And it is so cool. I couldn't tell how painful it would be to be hung by your hair. It's okay. So
I'm fascinated by circuses. Like I haven't been to one since I was a little kid, but I would love to go because like these kinds of things where I'm like, I just like, does this hurt for people? Like or like has she built up like a giant callus on her scalp from doing this so much that it just doesn't hurt her anymore? Like this is all wild to me. Like I find it all very fascinating.
It's the pain of performance.
Yeah, exactly. But she doesn't have a great time up here.
No, because it actually gives her an aerial view of her husband macking with the tattooed woman. So she just essentially cancels the entire performance right then and there. She screams she wants to be let down. She goes, she confronts them. She's very, very pissed off, and we just have to bring on other acts to do some damage control. But this is where it kind of goes to shit, Trace. So
I don't know what I was expecting from this movie.
I don't think many of us expected this, even though we maybe should have.
Well, okay. So what happens here, Joe?
Okay, so Concha locks Phoenix in their trailer, and she goes and I was going to say she confronts Orgo and the tattooed woman, but she doesn't. She gets a jar of acid and she throws it on Orgo's dick, as well as like the genital region of the tattooed woman. And Orgo gets so mad that he takes his knives. And this is honestly one of the most beautiful murder tableaus I have ever seen in my life.
The overhead shot from
right? Overhead.
Yes.
Jodorowsky films this. Yeah, so we are looking directly down. Orgo puts his wife up against his knife-throwing board and just chops off both of her arms.
I mean, because he brings the knives up and just slices them up, but then we get that arterial spray of blood coming out of her stumps, and I mean, it is
everything.
Yeah.
and we see her, and this is one of those sort of telltale signs. She very obviously looks like she dies right here. Well, and the movie presumes no, she's not dead. She'll come back later. But it's very much no, she actually died here. This is when it ends for her. But we pause on her head sort of tilted to the side. And the way it's framed on the board, it looks like she has a halo. She has been turned into a saint.
I missed that. Okay. Well, because her death mimics that of Loria from her, her saint.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's fitting, but I will confess I didn't expect that she died here. I mean, I figured it out at a certain point, once we really start doing psycho-y type things. But I fully bought in the fact that she was alive later in the movie.
Yeah. So we get some sad harmonica, we get this melancholy song, and we're not done because Orgo's junk is now kind of useless. So he just stumbles into the street and then takes the knife that he has in hand, slits his own throat publicly.
Well, and in full view of Fenix, who was watching from a nearby trailer.
Yep.
So, so he actually doesn't witness his mother's. Oh, maybe that's why. That's why he sees his father die. He doesn't see his mother die.
Yes, he probably just hears that she has lost both of her arms.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Either that or he does learn it and it disturbs him so badly that he just, has a dissociative break or something.
Because do you think he goes to a mental institution right now? Or is it later? And we don't really get that information.
No, it's a big question mark because there's this huge gap. There's only one final moment left in this flashback. And it is that, he sees dad die by suicide. But then he also sees the tattooed woman pack up all of her belongings, including Alma, and drive away in this VW van.
Yeah.
So we have lost everything in the space of one night.
So all of Act 1 of this 2-hour movies is one flashback, and then we got 80 minutes of the quote-unquote real movie to go.
There we go, yeah. So we're back in the present with adult Fenix, and this is when he's introduced to the hospital's group of patients. They all are Down syndrome, and it's interesting, right? The music continues throughout, so it feels like a kind of linkage from the past to the present. So it feels like we really haven't lost or gained any time, which I think it feels deliberate, right? The fact that we don't see, here's 20 years of him in this asylum. It feels like this is the next day, only he's an adult now.
Well, because I think you could argue that it's kind of linking it to Phoenix's stunted growth. At the end of the day, he's still a child in an adult's body.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so the group is meant to go see Robinson Crusoe at the movies. This is what the doctor says. It's going to help everybody. This guy seems great, which means he's got to get the fuck out of this movie immediately. So he drops them off at the movie theater and then leaves, which means they are promptly picked up by a pimp. This is Theo Jodorowsky.
Okay, but wait, he doesn't leave. He gets into the car to make out with the nurse.
Yeah.
It's very Friday the 13th. Oh my God, they were making love while Jason drowned. They were making love while this pimp gave all these people cocaine.
Oh my God. That was when I was just okay, is this a foreign film? Is this a film from the 80s? Is it a film from a guy who is known for provoking imagery? But watching a pimp give a bunch of they're almost young adult or early 20 something.
Yeah.
So watching a bunch of Down syndrome kids do lines of coke just felt so wrong on so many levels.
Because it's weird. When normally when movies show someone doing cocaine, at least especially modern ones, it's that close up of the dollar bill going over the coke. I guess I'm just thinking of Maxine in here because that's the most recent thing I've seen with cocaine.
It's the most recent example.
But no, we're just seeing him fully give a spoonful of this coke to these people and they just sniff it.
Yeah. And to be clear, I'm not suggesting that a person with Down syndrome doesn't have the capacity to understand what they're doing. I guess it's just more the movie presents it as they were misled. Like, they're there for a fun time, but they don't appear to understand, like, oh, the person who is looking out for you has passed you off to a bad person, and you probably shouldn't trust whatever it is that they want to do with you.
To be clear, nothing bad happens to them. They actually go have quite a fun time.
You know what? That's fair. Yeah, we do a little bit of coke. We get a little bit of sex work action, courtesy of Dolores, who is played by Mad Jesus Aranzabal.
So with this too, because we have a lot of extras in this scene, Alejandro Jodorowsky, he was invited. Okay, I'm going to use the word transvestite again. I cannot tell what he's saying, if he means like drag queen or like transgender, but he was invited to judge a Miss Transvestite Mexico pageant, and they wanted to give something like a prize to all the contestants, and so he was like, well, you want to just come be in this movie? And they had all their own costumes. So he was like, we don't have to provide costumes for anything. They came in their own garb, and like we shot them in this party scene.
Yeah, it was curious because I couldn't figure out if we were just meant to infer that these women were all sex workers, but there is that air of, okay, these are probably unpaid extras, or people that we just grabbed off the street and said, hey, let's be in this movie.
Mm-hmm. But apparently they did pay everyone, but it was like $1.
Ooh, okay.
Well, I mean, 1989 at the time, I don't know, maybe.
No, you can't say we paid them $1 in 1989 dollars. So I'm going to bring in a different person. So I found a piece by Jason Schenkel called In Santa Sangre, Life is a Psychosexual Circus, literally, for Gizmondo. And the reason I wanted to bring in Schenkel here is because I was like, is it important that we're going to see Robinson Crusoe? We make a very specific reference to it as opposed to just saying, let's go to the movies.
That's so funny because there's another movie in this movie that I was like, well, there has to be a reason for that later.
Right. And there is. Uh-huh. So Schenkel says, the choice of Robinson Crusoe is, of course, no accident. The world of Santa Sangre is populated by castaways, the wretched refuse, the misfits of society, the unworthy in the sight of God, the forgotten, the depraved, the abandoned, and the unloved.
Wow.
So, of course, Robinson Crusoe is a shipwreck tale, right? Yeah. So it's people who have kind of been set adrift by society and then either forgotten about or left to fend for themselves. Which is very much what's happening with this group of people, but then more specifically Fenix.
Well, yeah, because he's about to get a rude awakening.
Yeah, so he ends up not partaking of Dolores's charms, and he stays behind and sees that the pimp is dancing with none other than the tattooed woman, that bitch.
Yeah, so she is now working as a sex worker.
Yes, she is, yeah. Which is kind of awful. Like, this movie really has no compassion for her as the other woman. It essentially says, oh, well, yeah, she also gets burned by the acid, but she ends up having to live this life of a sex worker.
Yeah, but, she seems happy.
Well, she's a bit of a garbage person, too, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, because she's totally fine having Alma just get raped by her Johns.
Yes. I couldn't tell if that was because, much like Orgo killing himself after his dick and balls presumably gets horribly scarred, I wasn't sure if the tattooed woman would have difficulty, I guess, securing clients due to her disability. So she's like, well, I've got this perfectly great daughter, except for the deaf mute part.
I'm going to say she probably didn't have any trouble. She had like 4 guys on her while the other guy was off with Alma.
Well, that's fair, yeah. Ugh. Let's just say this movie's not great in its depiction of sex work. No. Okay, but we're not quite there yet because Fenix sees the tattooed woman, and it's almost like he's got this renewed joie de vivre. Like, we see him the next day, and all of a sudden, he's quite literally performing backflips.
Backflips, yes.
He's got a reason to live, everybody. I've got that bitch.
That dog's just like, wow, Robinson Crusoe did cure you. Look at you.
So not coincidentally, this is also when Concha mysteriously reappears. So she calls to her son from outside of the asylum, and he just climbs up that window, and out we go. And to me, this was one of the first big moments where you think, this isn't real. This is in his mind, because there's no fog, and then all of a sudden, when she appears, there's just fog at the end of the street, and we just disappear into it.
Good catch. I didn't catch the fog, but yeah, that's very clearly telegraphed.
Yeah. Okay, so we jump ahead to that evening. We do see that the tattooed woman is having a good night. Yeah, she's got a couple of drunken military men to hang out with, and she does prostitute out Alma. The line she says is awful.
Yeah, she's like, you can do whatever you want because no one will hear because she can't make a sound.
It's super duper gross.
Well, honestly, I think the most uncomfortable part of this movie is so this guy picks Alma up and like cradles her in his arms and she's still sleeping.
Yeah.
And she wakes up and starts freaking out.
Yes, as you would, right? I thought it was interesting, though. He, very clearly is paying for sex. He's gone to a sex worker, but then his activity is almost father-like to Alma, right? He picks her up and he rocks her as you would with a young child, but that's horrifying if you're waking up in the arms of a strange man.
Yeah, and so she's sent off running and just kind of runs into like every bad thing you could imagine on the street.
It's a little bit of, you were maybe safer at home because the streets are a dangerous place. So you might run into a man who rips off his ear and accosts you with it.
And I will say, I know he mentioned it to like, John Waters be like, oh, you can pop out your eye. Let me put you in the movie. Again, I think that's what Jodorowsky did. He says, and I quote, I don't understand what the ear ripping scene means in the movie. It was done with my unconscious.
Oh, okay. It's very much just the streets are a place where you might meet a variety of different people who could be threatening.
Well, because earlier with the pimp scene, there was a guy that tries to like attack the pimp and he pushes him off. And then he knocks him out. But then we see this guy with a deformed leg who kind of like hops over to him and like robs him.
Right. Yes. The streets are dangerous.
Yes, very much.
Okay, so Alma ends up climbing up onto the roof of a truck, and she ends up sleeping there, and then this is where we get our first and only use of a killer POV, and this is our second very clear sign that we're doing a certain something, because we can very clearly see the long red fingernails of the killer as they approach the tattooed woman with a knife and just absolutely go to town on this woman.
I mean, it goes on for a while. It's a really good death scene. Now,
it reminded me of Tenebrae.
Well, yeah, because the arm getting cut off and just spraying blood over the white sheet, or the white wall. Yeah. This is arguably like the most horror-y sequence in the film. It's masterfully done. It's gorgeous to look at. I love the lighting in this scene.
Yeah, and you're right. It goes on to the point where it almost becomes comical because we are throwing blood on every surface of this room.
And my subtitles, set to exciting calypso music.
Right? Yes. I was going to say, there's so much calypso music and mariachi band in this movie, and I loved all of it.
But yeah, so nevertheless, Tattoo Woman is our Marion Crane.
Yeah, so she's dead, and then Alma comes home in the morning and finds her mutilated body. So now we know there's a killer on the loose.
But she, sees a picture of child Phoenix in his magician's outfit, and I guess she's kind of like, oh, I guess I'm going to go find Phoenix now.
It's weird, right? It's almost like she also has a stunted childhood infantilization complex or something.
I mean, I would argue she didn't at least witness a death, but she did see Orgo's body, and I would imagine she saw Concha's body too.
It's just fascinating the way that the film has no interest in chronicling the years in between the flashback and then the present. But it doesn't hurt the film. I don't think it matters at the end of the day, but it is wild that it's basically, no, these are the same characters. They really have not changed very much.
Yeah, exactly.
So she sets off to find Phoenix, and then this is where we see Concha performing on stage. This is everything.
Every time we do this, I thought it was so, and this is where Axel, this comes in wild handy. Fun fact too, again, would not happen today. So in particular, the scenes where they have to be really active whenever it's Phoenix acting as Concha's arms, the actress Blanca Guerra was kind of like, well, how do I not pull away? And Alejandro Jodorowsky goes, grab onto my son's testicles from behind, and that way you won't get too separated. So every time they're like in an action set piece, this actress is holding on to Axel's balls.
Intimacy coordinator? Can we get an intimacy coordinator on the scene?
Hold on to my son's testicles.
He probably likes it. Oh, God. Okay. So much about this movie, not okay.
It's wild.
But yeah, so folks, if you have not seen this and you're just thinking, oh, what the fuck are they talking about? So her stage production is that she still has no arms because they have been cut off. So she has her son do the arm pantomime, and they are perfectly in sync. There's whole sections where you only see Concha, and it's only when you realize, oh, no, there's another person that's behind her that's doing this, but it's a whole elaborate stage production.
Well, and this is a performance because they're doing the story of Adam and Eve, you know, his hands as hers do like the snake. But like for me, the most impressive part of this performance, it comes later, I think, when she's playing the piano. But there are times when they're just hanging out. They're not doing a performance. They're just like sitting around talking, and his arms like mimic her emotion at the time, you know? So if she's sad, like, you know, he'll put his hand up on her cheeks, you know?
Yes.
It's
so good.
It's really good.
Yeah. And it feels like the kind of thing where they would have had to rehearse this to get the level of intimacy and detail right, because it is flawless. It's very seamless.
Oh, yeah. I mean, which I'm sure that 3 years at Marcel Marceau's mime school really paid off.
There we go. Nobody ever said that miming wasn't useful, folks. So, yeah, the performance ends. This is clearly a big hit. Like, we've got a good audience, so we
should also point out, too, that they're on, like, a stage that looks very extravagant.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know where this is or what they're doing.
No, it's like, where is this theater? How did this start? How long has it been going on? And so on. But, yeah. So we head backstage, and almost immediately Fenix is being hit on by this woman, Ruby, who is played by Gloria Contreras, and she will eventually be revealed to be a kind of burlesque performer. So she performs a striptease to music. And I should note that if you're even casually looking at the screen, because Fenix is doing the arms of his mother, he has her red painted fingernails.
Yes. Very striking. I love this design choice.
I mean, yeah, it's great, but I would argue that this is why it's weird that the film wants to have it both ways, with both, it's a reveal that, his mother has been dead the whole time, and he's been acting on her behalf, but he's actually mentally ill, because the movie very clearly telegraphs, like, these are the same red nails we just saw murder the tattooed woman.
I think what you're supposed to think, though, is that, like, again, like, not necessarily that she's dead. She is alive, but they do this together. You know, she goes to kill them, but he still has to act as her hands.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, I can buy that.
I think that's what we're supposed to think.
Well, we do see it in action, so that would make sense.
Yeah, again, you know, she's holding on to his testicles. This sequence reminded me, I'll give you one guess what this reminded me of.
Is it Peeping Tom?
It is Peeping Tom. Yes. That great, one of the first kills he does when he practices with that woman from the red shoes after hours and then kills her. Mm-hmm. That's all this gave me. Which, also giving the fact that, you know, in that film, we're also dealing with a very sympathetic, I would argue, serial killer.
Right. Okay. Which is hilarious, because I saw no references to Peeping Tom, and I saw a billion references to Psycho.
Well, and you know, I want to make the distinction, because I do think that Norman Bates is a sympathetic serial killer, but we don't spin the movie with Norman Bates in the same way that we spin Peeping Tom with Mark, or spending Santa Sangre with Fenix, you know? So I would argue that, honestly, yeah, I do think this is more in line with Peeping Tom, which also, he's traumatized by his father in that movie.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes, and important to note, so the murder that we're talking around is the murder of Ruby. So Fenix shows up after hours at this empty theater, and Ruby is waiting for him. Important to note, though, that Fenix does show up in his father's costume. So he is now wearing the knife-throwing outfit in the sort of Star-Spangled Banner colors. Mm-hmm. And yeah, he definitely puts Ruby into a trance as he's talking her through, this is how I'm going to do the knife-throwing act. And he does a couple, and then Concha shows up and basically says, she's dirty, she's defiled you, this is sinful. And she says, get rid of this bitch. So we throw a knife right into Ruby's chest. And what I love is, because she's still in the trance, just like we saw with Concha, she doesn't realize what's even happened. So Concha makes Fenix take Ruby out of the trance before she dies. Awful.
Yeah, so she wakes up and like dies very dramatically. And I will argue at this point, moving forward, this is where we start getting into much more surrealist imagery and plot.
Why? Just because we bring out a giant rabbit costume to put Ruby's body into?
Okay, but like the burying in the ground and painting her white. Like, it is... Yeah. Again, like, they go, why is he painting them white? Do you think that's a holdover from seeing Alma in makeup, so he's trying to make them all look as beautiful as he remembered Alma?
I think so, yeah. You know, in some ways it's almost a bit of a rebellion against mom. Obviously, he doesn't want to, quote unquote, kill these women. He feels a sexual attraction, and that's why the mom image is encouraging him to dispatch them. But then, yeah, he says, okay, well, you're kind of like my true love that I lost. So he paints them white like Alma.
Yeah. And the idea, and I don't know if we've gotten there yet, but the idea here is that he cannot control his hands because his hands are his mother's hands.
Yes, which is a great conceit.
Well, it's just, again, if we're comparing it to Psycho, it's great because he's not becoming his mother, only his arms are.
Yeah. It feels so disembodied too, right? Almost like Clive Barker wrote a short story that was eventually turned into part of an anthology film. Cannot remember the name of the short story, but it's basically hands become sentient and like chop themselves off of people's bodies and like run rampant.
Is it in Books of Blood? Is it the body politic?
It is the body politic.
Yeah,
thank you.
I've read that one.
It's one of the ones you actually read. Wild. Okay.
I read the first 3 Books of Blood.
Yeah, but I love this idea of, you know, we have appendages that are attached to us that we think we control, but they don't respond to us. They respond to either themselves or someone else, because that is a really scary concept.
Oh, yeah. Which, funnily enough, like 2 years before this would be explored very heavily in Evil Dead 2.
Right. Just that, yeah. So important to note, when we are digging this grave to throw Ruby's body in the ground, Fenix is dressed in a trench coat. He's got sunglasses on at night, and he's wearing very sparkly boots. So there's a level of almost campy performativity to this as well.
Well, but because as we'll learn, this is not the first body he's burying in this area.
Yeah. Well, I have questions about that.
But yeah, there's something very ceremonial about this.
Well, and you mentioned that there's a little bit of surrealism too, right? Because there's a whole thing that we need to do with the painting. And then all of a sudden there's a light that quite literally comes out of this grave as though we've got, some kind of lighting plan in there or something. And then I put that we see a goose. Is that what you saw?
I put a swan.
Okay. Some kind of bird flies out of the gravesite.
But to me, this feels like it's his way of coping with the fact that he or his mother killed them. Is to me, the swan is the embodiment of her soul, like going to heaven.
Yes, yeah, and we will elaborate on that when we finish the film.
Yeah.
But important to note that as Phoenix sees this, he does stretch his arms out, and this goes directly to him in bed in the morning with his arms up, but we're also seeing him praying to the elephant from the flashback. So we're like really intercutting or collapsing these 3 ideas together.
Well, because then we'll also see blood coming out of Phoenix's nose. So it's like he takes on traits of the elephant. And it's like, clearly that traumatized him.
Yes. So I'm going to bring Sang back in at this point. Sang says, the murders will ferry these women towards holiness, liberating them so that they may resurface sinless from the grave as purified birds in graceful, dazzling flight.
Oh, okay.
So I guess, again, you mentioned, it's got a kind of ritual to it. And I think so much of religion and holiness is ritualistic.
Yes. Yeah.
And you're like, yes.
Yeah, I can't say no to that.
Okay, so if you don't buy our queer-coded reading of the film so far, let's give you a softball one. Because when Phoenix wakes up in bed in the morning, he's wearing satin pajamas with ostrich feather sleeves next to his mother, who is wearing the exact same thing, sans arms.
Thank you for saying, because I never know what to call them. I just call them feathers, but it's like those long, like thin tendril feathers. So glad to know I have a name for them now. Ostrich feathers. Who'd have thought?
So, yeah, this is where we kind of get to see a bit of their morning routine. He plays her arms as she berates him for being weak and suggesting that without her, no one will see him. And of course, we've got a giant Invisible Man poster on the kitchen wall.
So I'm sure you're going to give me a read for this, but I will say, so the Invisible Man scene was incorporated into the film and suggested by Alejandro Jodorowsky because he and his co-writer Leone were looking for a reference that Phoenix could look up to, something to fill his loneliness. And Leone agreed and said, yes, we should do the Invisible Man because that's something that his inner child was always fascinated by, and it scared him, seeing when he unwraps the bandages, like nothing was there. It was so cool and scary at the same time. So that's
right.
their reason for putting it in, but what is our read for putting this in?
Well, I think this comes back to the Robinson Crusoe sort of forgotten people on the margins kind of idea, right? This idea that he only achieves a level of fame or even escapes from the mental institution with the urging or the help of his mother, right? So we saw that we were performing to this crowd in the theater, but if we're not doing the arms, then who are we? Like, you're just a set of arms.
Right.
It's her that people are coming to see.
I also think, though, it's like, oh, he's like, this is his, because, I mean, to be clear, he reenacts the scene of, like, taking the bandages. So when he's watching this, he has, like, the Invisible Man, like, Claude Rains' bandages on, the glasses, and he takes it off himself. I also think it's like, well, he's a psychopath. Like, he's looking up to a psychopath.
Right, yeah, because when we talked about The Invisible Man, we were both kind of shocked at the body count in that film and how remorseless the killer is.
Oh, yeah, he's the most dangerous universal monster, and he's the only one that's human. But then we also have, like, again, this is when we get the chicken shit. Not literal chicken shit, but, like, so while he's playing piano with Concha, he has visions of a chicken eating a severed arm, but then this room where I'm going to say he's dressed to look like Christ.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And there are chickens all
everywhere
over the floor and chickens like raining from the sky, like real chickens. And I watched this. It's a beautiful like image that I've never seen before, but I was like, what are we doing here?
Well, this comes right after she berates him, and then, we have to go through this whole rigmarole of, okay, well, come sit next to mommy, let's do our number. And I can't help but feel like it's a little literal. He sees himself as a bit of a Christ figure where he's got to suffer all of these indignities for the sake of, her fame and her ego.
Yeah, but then why chickens?
I don't know. I don't know if chickens symbolize something in particular or if it's just like a reference point, we had chickens around the church, because we're also seeing imagery of the church being destroyed by the bulldozers.
Right. And to be clear, y'all, there may not be a reason. I feel like Jodorowsky would like reject any like strict reading of his films. So
he might just say, it looks beautiful, so I did it.
100%.
What's interesting, too, about this is that if you haven't caught on that Concha is a hallucination, she, at this point, like, we're playing the piano, we're doing our duet, and she stops because she said, like, she essentially senses that he is having these hallucinations. And then we have this beautiful camera work where we do a slow circle around them so that we can kind of contextualize where they are in the geography. And then we get a full-on kiss on the lips between mother and son.
We sure do. And this is when we cut to him watching The Invisible Man. But then, like, okay, so he watches The Invisible Man and, he takes the bandages off and he just looks at his face and he screams. But then we cut right into the back of his mother at the top of this. Oh, the way this is shot, by the way. So we're in this like big empty room with this long ass staircase. And Concha is just sitting on the staircase in like a rocking chair. And she is screaming at him, you failed again. But she's just knitting. She's knitting stockings. And so he goes up and he just sits behind her to be her arms again because she needs him to be her arms. To knit.
Yeah. It's a life that is not his own, right? And we've already talked about how he's kind of infantilized mentally. He's stuck at the point of those flashbacks. So truly, this is a person who is not living their own life.
No, not at all. I mean, we'll find out later, but this gorgeous looking house he's in isn't so gorgeous.
No, it's very run down, ramshackle kind of.
But it looks beautiful here because that's how he's envisioning it.
Right. Good catch. Good catch. So Fenix goes out, and this is one of those things where it's a bit of an odd scene because I didn't know if it was going to pay off later. Like, I really didn't know where the film was going to go from this point on because it felt like, okay, we've established bad, possibly dangerous relationship with a domineering mother, and we know that Alma is on the lookout for him. So you know that those two are going to intersect.
Absolutely.
But then we go out to buy some groceries from Trina, who is a woman played by Zonia Rangel Mora. And she is hitting on him. Like, it's kind of funny. All the women that meet Fenix want to fuck him. And we should clarify, like, Axel Jodorowsky is a good-looking guy. He cleans up well when he's got his hair in the ponytail. He does have a slightly feline, effeminate features, like it's a soft look to him.
Yeah.
So in that case, it's he looks delicate, like you might break him if you handled him too strongly.
Yeah.
But so Trini really wants to fuck this guy. She more or less finagles an invite, and he's like, cool, okay, I'll see you later. But then when he turns around, he sees... Okay, here's where we're going to get into trouble.
He pulls a big python out of his pants.
Yes, and he does that because he sees another parade going down the street, except that this is in effigy of a muscular female wrestler, or Saint Santa, who will eventually be played by S. Rodriguez.
The snake, though. I feel like this is very on the nose, right? Like, he is...
It's his dick.
Well, yes. We're also, because we did the Adam and Eve thing earlier, and the snake, is the serpent is Satan, leading us into temptation. Yep. And so, he sees a female performer who will be revealed to be, I'm going to say a transgender performer?
Well, okay, so this is the question, and I really wanted an answer to this, and I could not find it for all of my looking. So this is a male actor. And you can see that he is wearing a breastplate when we go to the change room to deliver flowers because, Fenix has a reaction to this individual, seeks them out, sees them performing. But here's the thing. The film doesn't ever suggest that this is a man doing drag. It's not cross-dressing. Like, I do actually think that we're meant to look at this as a female lucha libre.
That's what I thought, too, because... Because I didn't realize it was a breastplate. I thought it was actually meant to be like Saint's breasts. But the dub, at least on the English dub, it's a woman's voice over this male actor. Like, it's not this male actor's voice.
Okay. Yeah, the voice in the Spanish track was unclear. Like, it could have been a man doing a slightly female affectation, or it could have been a woman with a slightly masculine affectation.
Yeah, no, the one in the English dub is very clearly like a feminine voice woman. Like, it is not this person.
Okay, so I have a question then. How do you read this? Like, do you read this as a female identifying character because we're not given any other context, or do you see this as like a trans woman?
So I read her as a trans woman because I thought at first, okay, maybe these are like exoticos, right? Like the lucha libres that are like gay men who, I mean, if anyone saw that, Cassandro, the Gael Garcia Bernal biopic from last year. Really good, by the way. Please go watch it.
It's really, really good. Yeah.
But yeah, so I read this as a transgender person. However, I've seen, the Wikipedia page says a cross-dressing wrestler. So there doesn't seem to be an agreement on it. And so but with, again, what I thought was actual breasts, not a breastplate, or maybe not. Well,
it could have been intended to be that, and it's just like we don't have the budget to do the makeup or something like that, which again is why I was looking for some kind of clarity.
Yeah, so I don't know, but nevertheless, I'm glad it's not the first kill, because I think if it was, you could read that as, he is in love with a cross-dressing man or a transgender woman, and it's queer, and therefore mother wants to kill them. Like, at least, quote unquote, it's the second one, and she puts up a fight.
Well, the other interesting thing about this is the other women that we've seen hitting on Fenix seem to be, I'm gonna say they're a bit floozy-ish, right?
Yeah, sure.
And we spend the most amount of time with Saint Santa, and it seems like they actually kind of get along. Like, Saint Santa seems to go along with aspects other than just wanting to fuck him. Like, she agrees to come and see his theater performance, which is in a dingy cellar and looks shady as fuck. But, they have a good chemistry, and I quite liked it. Like, I was disappointed because that Concha is going to show up and say, oh, you're polluting my son, you need to die. But Fenix actually seems to struggle with this. He tries to convince Saint Santa to run away, but of course, she's got them shoulders and them arms, so we think that maybe she's going to be able to punch him in the face and just leave, and that initially is the case. And then Mom says, use the sword.
Well, because Phoenix tries to claw her eyes out, which is quite striking. But yeah, then this sword comes out. And well, also because the way Concha is revealed on stage is he opens a coffin that's standing up and Concha's just inside, like telling him what to do from the coffin, but she's not moving. So this is one of the few times too where Fenix kills someone but doesn't have Concha like in front of him doing it.
Right. Yeah, because like the whole idea is that he's doing this magic act on stage. So he's got a sarcophagus and he says, oh, I'm going to, reanimate the dead. Haha, from a film perspective. So he opens the lid and oops, it's Concha and not the mummy that we thought it was going to be. But, this again very much makes sense in terms of what we've seen in terms of the ritual and the way that his memories are intersecting with the way he's living his life now. So Sang says that this is an instance of Fenix being held prisoner by his memories, but he's also becoming a martyr, right? Like he's overcome by this religious fixation to his mother. And as a result, like we do these horrible things, but yeah. So down goes Saint Santa.
Yep, Saint Santa is out of the picture.
Okay, so while this is happening, Alma has discovered somehow where they are living. So she sneaks into a window, she finds makeup, so she reapplies her game face from the circus days.
So Alma found like a flyer for Concha's magic arms, and I guess it had the address where he was staying, and I guess she was the only person that saw this and the only one that wanted to come see it.
I guess. It's one of those things where it doesn't quite work logistically, but I also don't really care.
It doesn't matter. But she finds Phoenix's vanity and then begins painting her face white, dressing up just like she was as a child in the prologue.
Yeah. So while she's doing that, we're about to intersect these storylines, but first we have to get probably the most dreamlike section of the film as Fenix. Well, the idea is that he's now buried Saint Santa's body in the graveyard alongside Ruby, but then all of these other women in, the white face with marriage and or funeral veils come out of the ground and they start basically haunting him and saying, why did you kill me?
Yeah, but it's like, you killed me. Like, they're not speaking forcefully or angrily. This felt very, like, Asian inspired, but also, I'll bring it back to Italy. It reminded me of Cemetery Man.
Oh, yeah.
But this is probably the most surreal scene in the film, just given like what's going on here. But so you said you read this differently, because I read this as, he's killed a bunch of women. Like, we just haven't seen it happen.
Yeah, it's a question mark because we haven't seen any of the other murders and time is so fluid in the film. It's kind of unclear. I guess I looked at this as a byproduct of his fractured mind. So yes, you could easily say, oh, wow, he's killed, roughly a dozen women at this point. I read this as this is just like the victims, like made up imaginary victims of all the women he's maybe even had impure thoughts about.
See, and I guess the reason I was also reading is like, he's killed all these women, we just haven't seen them, is because it's based on that actual serial killer who killed 17 women.
Right. Well, now that I know that does make more sense, doesn't it?
Either way, I don't think either reading is wrong. I think you can see it both ways. I mean, like, again, like, I'm sure Jodorowsky would welcome both interpretations.
I think I'm happy to give you the win for this one because your reading makes a lot of sense. Mine is kind of like, we didn't see the murder, so I didn't think that made sense.
Well, and I think there's another version of this movie where it is just him going off and killing 17 women. That's your slasher movie version of this.
Yeah, I don't need that version.
I mean, I would watch it, but yeah,
sure.
this is a more interesting
seen it a
version.
billion times.
Yeah, sure. One more visual here, though, because one of these ghost women brings out a white horse that has the tattooed woman's tattoos all over it.
Yeah. Again, very, very striking.
Yeah. Rob Zombie would love it.
Oh my God. He sure would.
White horse.
Actually, wait. Isn't What's-Her-Face wearing like white face makeup when she's riding the horse in Halloween 2?
Kinda. Oh my God. She, although she's not naked though, because all these corpses are naked.
That is true. Yeah. Jodorowsky does not have a problem with nudity.
Not at all.
Okay, so let's come back to Alma, because we're finally going to have her reconnect with Fenix. But we should note that the house has actually begun rocking, and I'm going to attribute this to it's very much a projection or a symbol of Phoenix's mind. So as he's trying to make his way through, it's like the house is deteriorated now, and it's starting to shift and lose its focus.
Well, and when we see Alma walking around the house, this is when we see that the house is actually dilapidated. So this is the real version of the house. We have not seen this because we've only been seeing the house through Phoenix's eyes, and it's been pristine, clean, and gorgeous looking.
Yeah. In reality, it's not so good. Yeah. But they do find each other, and we get this great, nice moment where they spin and they float and they kiss, and it's all very cute.
Yeah, no, it's really cute until it's not.
Yes, exactly. Because, of course, it's climax time. We got to bring Mom back. So Concha appears, and she doesn't even want him to kill her. She wants him to cut off Alma's arms.
Well, she starts by saying, "I order my hands to kill her." And I love this again. I think Axel's miming ability here, because his hand seems to be possessed as he's drawn to Concha. But yeah, you're right. He's fighting it. And this is when, she says, cut off the arms. Cut off her arms.
Oof. And then I thought, okay, so we're gonna do this. He's gonna finally fight back against Mom. He's probably gonna kill her if she's even real, or he's gonna realize. Like, I fully thought when he stabs Concha in the stomach, I thought, he's just stabbed himself and he's just gonna die.
Right. No, I to me, that's the more cliche version of that.
Yes. So I was happy it doesn't happen, but I was surprised.
Yeah. But while this is all happening, like that female pharmacist that he bought the stuff from earlier.
Yeah, fucking Trini shows up. She's like, ooh, and then just runs out. And that's how we get the police.
Which I do think it's a little silly because it's very much like a hello, I'm here to fuck you. And then she's like, oh my God.
It's very silly, but I was happy that at least it paid off, because otherwise I didn't know why we had that earlier scene.
Yeah, absolutely. Which you could have easily just had it be like, the cops were called because there was a ruckus, because it's a lot of noise, or maybe the house is rocking. Who knows?
But this adds a nice bit of levity in the middle of our climax.
But it doesn't rob anything from it, because I said at the beginning of the episode, I found this movie very touching by the time the credits rolled, and this catharsis of Phoenix stabbing Concha, but she doesn't die though. She goes up, she walks up to the stairs, and she starts to fade out, but she tells him, you will never be free of me. I am inside of you, and just starts laughing maniacally as she fades away. And this is when we get the flashbacks that are like, she's been dead the whole time.
She's been dead the whole time. Just in case you weren't paying attention, she's been dead.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing about this, and this felt very unique compared to other dead teenager films, Mr. Ebert, when Alma is being threatened, she never screams. She never tries to fight back. No. She just looks at Fenix, and she doesn't say anything because she is incapable of doing so. But the look she's giving him is, I trust you. I love you. You're going to figure this out. I know you're not going to harm me.
Yeah. Now, I will say, the one part of this reveal that I did find very surprising. So again, you're like, oh, she's dead the whole time. Cool. So it's just him, killing these women.
Right.
He has a ventriloquist doll of his mother.
He does. Yep.
That he's been used. So really, I wanted to see more in the flashback. Like, I wanted to see him killing the tattooed woman with that fucking mannequin, this armless mannequin.
Oh no, I think it just would have been too silly, because the movie wants to go for touching. It doesn't want to go for dumb.
But this doll also looks really creepy. Like it does. In concept, in theory, it is funny, but it looks not right.
Yeah. So at this point, we have Alma, who has guided him back to this doll, but we also have the clowns back. We've got Aladdin back.
Everyone's back.
And everybody kind of gets this moment to say, you know what, Phoenix, you're okay now. All you got to do is get rid of this doll, be free of your mom's ghost, and then we can wave goodbye and disappear as well, because none of us have been here the whole time.
Yeah.
So I'm going to bring Sang back one last time. So they say, Santa Sangre concludes not with a showdown, but with sacrilege. Fenix desecrating the temple he's created in worship of his mother, incinerating her effigy, finally emancipating himself from her servitude. It's also an act of philosophical upheaval, disowning the ideology that has defined him, which deplaces selfhood and exalts trauma above all else.
Okay.
So basically, it's like the whole house, I kind of read it more as, oh, this is his fragile mind. But if you think about it, this is actually more of a shrine, right? Even down to the cellar theater performance, where maybe that's where he was actually doing that initial production that we saw earlier on, right?
Yeah.
Because that could have been the fantasy.
Well,
he was never performing to sold out crowds.
That's what I thought that the first time we saw him doing it, like, it's where we kill Satan Santa, like that's what he's been performing at this entire time. This underground, like, homemade stage.
Yeah, which I guess then does make sense that Alma would find a shitty looking flyer that nobody else paid attention to because it's just his home address.
Well, but it's also like, I don't even know if it's his home. Like, I think it's just like
oh yeah, it's just a house.
Like an abandoned house. He's living in squalor. But nevertheless, the final lines of this film. So Alma and Fenix walk out, they're held at gunpoint by the cops and they're like, raise your hands. And it's such a weird thing, I loved it. I would love to know what Jodorowsky's original ending was, whatever the sad ending was going to be. I don't know what it was, but the last lines we get is Fenix is able to raise his hands on his own, and he just exclaims, "My hands, my hands, my hands!" And that's the end of the movie. But it's like it sucks. Yeah, he's gonna go to jail because he's a fucking serial killer. But yeah, there's something so like cathartic and just like touching about. Oh, he has his hands back.
Yeah, he's in control of his own life, and by virtue of that, his own hands. But yeah, it's such a simple moment, and it's so effective. We do also end with a quote from Psalms, which is 143.6,8. It's very, very specific.
So I think that's Psalm 143, verse 6 and verse 8.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay. Clearly somebody does know religion.
Well, normally it would be 6 through 8, but I'm assuming they skipped 7 because Parched Land has an ellipses after it.
I see. Okay. But yeah, the gist of this is more or less the idea of stretching your hands towards where souls go, i.e. heaven. So in some ways you could infer, oh, well, maybe this means he's not even just going to go to jail. He might be killed. But the fact that he's reached almost that religious enlightenment that Jodorowsky is so keen to explore in his other films, right? It's a hard path to take, but he finally is in control of it. He's reached his destination.
Yep, absolutely. I also wanted to see what verse 7 was to see like if they okay, here we go. What we have is, I stretch out my hands to thee, my soul thirsts for thee like a parched land. Teach me the way I should go, for thee I should lift up my soul. Between Parched Land and that Teach Me the Way, we have, answer me quickly, Lord, my spirit fails. Do not hide your face from me, or I will be like those who go down to the pit.
Oh, yeah. So we're removing references to hell. And also explicit references to God.
Yeah, absolutely. So
interesting.
Very intentional. Very intentional. Yeah, no, I kind of just sat there and like watched the credits roll for a while after this ended.
Yeah. It's so weird, right? Because when I finished watching, I thought, that's not particularly complicated, right? It's a kid who gets fucked up by his parents, and then he ends up internalizing this trauma, and he becomes an accidental killer, or a manipulated killer, if you will. But even just having this conversation with you, describing, going through some of the visuals, unpacking some of these interactions, I do think that this is a bit of a complicated text, but it's not unassailable. Like, it's not so difficult that you look at this and say, oh my God, I can't. Like, I need my computer to unpack every little moment.
If I showed my parents this, they would be like, what the fuck are you making us watch?
Oh, of course.
But I mean, this was much more accessible and straightforward than I was expecting based on what I knew about Jodorowsky's filmography.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that is Santa Sangre, everyone. Joe, any final thoughts on this?
Well, like all of our film titles that are a little bit less popular or international or a little bit older, we don't often get the download numbers that I would like to see. So obviously we're coming up on, 2 hours here. But if you have not, for some reason, checked out this movie, I bequeath you. It is worth your time. So definitely check out an unusual title. Take a chance. This one's worth it.
You bequeath them?
Yes, I bequeath them.
You know that's not the right word. Bequeath is when I
beseech you.
Beseech you. Yes, beseech you. I was like, are you leaving? Did you die? Are you leaving them something in your will?
Yes, I floated up to heaven because I've regained the use of my hands.
Yeah, there you go. I feel the same. Smaller films like this, or less recognizable films like this, don't get the download numbers, and it's expected here. But I love covering these because, again, this is a new film for me. I probably never would have watched this otherwise. So, if you made it all this way and you haven't seen the film, please seek it out. There's a lot to like here.
And let's face it, Trace, this is all just fodder for your Weird Wednesdays at this point.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And I trust me, I go through our entire backlog of what can I screen at Terror Tuesday and Weird Wednesday. Okay, everyone. Well, before we announce what we're covering next week, if you want to get in touch with us, you can reach us on Twitter and Instagram at HorrorQueers. Shoot us an email at horrorqueers@gmail.com. Find us on Letterboxd to keep track of all the films we've covered. If you want to chat with other listeners, please join our Facebook Horror Queers group. Leave us a rating or a review, ideally, on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you want even more content, please support the show by becoming a patron at patreon.com/horrorqueers. If you subscribe today, you will get 321 and a half hours of Patreon content, including this month's new episodes on Hannibal Season 1, Episode 7, A Quiet Place Day 1, Maxine, Longlegs, and, to tie in with Longlegs, a brand new audio commentary on David Fincher's 1995 classic, Seven.
There you go. You don't have to say that one anymore because we're about to move into a new month.
Yeah, it's always my favorite time. The last week of the month. Joe.
Yes.
What are we covering next week?
Well, we are changing gears dramatically. We're going to come back to the US and we're going to do, I think, our first ever screen horror on the main feed because we're talking about Unfriended Dark Web.
Oh my god, yes, everyone. The sequel to Unfriended. I feel like a lot of people skipped it when it hit, because it got a very limited theatrical release. But,
yeah.
I mean, look, this is a ripoff of The Den, but sure. I still think it's a really good movie.
It's fun, and if you had a problem with the characters being assholes in the first film, well, actually, I don't know. Are they still assholes or are they just less assholes than the first film?
I think they're all fine. One of them is an asshole, but he's meant to be the jokester of the group. But
okay.
Because these are adults we're working with here. We're not dealing with teenagers.
There we go. Yeah, none of these dead teenager films for us.
None of them. But until next week, everyone, we can cross out Santa Sangre.
Indeed. And cross out Horror Queers.